Thank you so much. All right, hello everybody. This is a kind of a new format to kind of hear everybody, but you can all hear us. Okay, perfect. All right, amazing. Hi everyone, my name's Megan. I'm a sustainable fashion journalist, and I'm very happy to be hosting this interesting panel today. It's a slightly left field, I would say, conversation compared to what a lot of the conversations have been on the topics the last few days. But we're talking about the power of virtual worlds and gaming to influence new audiences on sustainability narratives. So, gaming is maybe a sector that I'm less familiar with, but I've been doing a lot of research over the last few days, and I have discovered that the industry is expected to grow to 266 billion by 2028, and that's according to BCG's 2024 gaming report. So it is a huge, huge industry, and as our panel today will tell us that, gaming has a really broad appeal. It's not just maybe your typical who you would think of as a gamer. Children are gaming, older generations, retirees are gaming. And so there's a huge broad appeal for something like sustainability narratives, which is what we're going to be talking about today, trying to find untapped opportunities in this huge market. So I'd like to very quickly hand it over to Lucy, and everyone can introduce themselves. And can you tell me a little bit about how you define virtual world? What's your take on that?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. I grew up in Southeast London, and I was the youngest of three kids, and my brother was 8 years older than me and a computer programmer. So we had one of those early BBC Acorns in the house, and I used to spend hours playing Chucky Egg and a quest-based game, which I cannot remember the name of, but you had to open various doors by doing various puzzles, all doing type input. And I loved it. And it was to me as good as retreating with a book. So that was my kind of early experience of virtual worlds. And now I'm the CEO of FUTERRA. And FUTERRA is a sustainability advisory. We do new narratives and positioning. We do climate transition action plans for businesses. I'm also trustee of FUTERRA Solutions Union, which is set up to work with culture in order to create change on climate. And now virtual worlds often are spoken about in my industry as a problem for keeping people sitting down or using lots of energy. But I think there's much in them that can be, we can be made curious about in terms of their impact on sustainability and climate. And I think we're going to cover more of that later. So I'll stop there.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lucy.
Hi, I like the interesting comment about curiosity. And I'm coming from an artist's point of view. In a sense that I studied painting and fine art in the 90s in Cardiff, and then I graduated from the Royal College of Art in 1991 as a photographer. And I actually came to sort of the gaming virtual reality environment a little bit later in my life, probably when I was 30. I'm now nearly 60. So I think this idea about the intergenerational aspect of virtual reality worlds is actually quite interesting, that the kind of people who participate in that are perhaps not the normal demographics that we might think. So you may say, well, why am I here today? Because when I arrived today, I found it a really interesting environment with all these kind of phraseologies and terminologies for these materials. And I think as an artist, the kind of things that I make and I use, it doesn't really matter whether it's paint, plastic, print, waste materials, wax. I'm hoping there's an image up there that shows you a virtual image which has got this kind of painted, sort of triptych-like sculpture coming out there. That's actually surf wax, and surf wax is made from petroleum. There are new alternatives to surf wax, but in actual fact, it's not a good material. So I intentionally use materials, and the gaming area, I think I played Grand Theft Auto 25 years ago, and I now make machinima films, which is a kind of fan art where you create these kind of like films through the game engines. And I think we've got a short 30-second clip which will give you an idea. Hopefully it's running. Dare I actually look round? Yes, it is. So these are 3 clips. One's from Grand Theft Auto, which people may be familiar with. One clip's from a game called Cyberpunk 2077, which is set in the future, and one's from a game called Red Dead Redemption. And those three games have literally billions of players. So hopefully you've got some sort of visual sense of the things that I create.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andy. Rhea, do you want to tell us about your take on virtual worlds?
Yeah, sure. So actually, this is really new for me because I actually, in this setup, I come from a gaming industry, less fashion and less fabric. So I'm learning a lot here. And for me, actually, I would say the edge between virtual world versus real world is actually blurring more and more. I think that whenever that your headspace is not in the real world, that is a moment you're in the virtual world. But you see actually a lot of gaming IP coming into real life, and then you will interact with them in different media. And at the same time, games become more and more realistic. And we're not touching on this like VR, AR world yet. But even that, actually, you spend time and then you interact inside of the games. Games has become more like even a cultural thing. It is not only entertainment. There are people knowing each other inside of the game and they get married in real life. And that is really a virtual world coming into real world. So a brief introduction of Planet Play. I think maybe less people know us as we're from the game industry. We are a platform that dedicated to leveraging games power on driving sustainability agenda. So we work a lot with game companies, and at the same time we also work with NGOs and the wider entertainment industry, brands, and a lot of the people, and trying to basically use the digital media's power to emphasizing and make positive change in this world.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think something I read in my research, there was an industry body that said that gaming will be fully integrated into Gen Alpha's lives by 2030 in the same way that social media is integrated into our life and the life of Gen Z today, which is so interesting to frame it in this way, that it really is so much of the future of next generations and the way that we're going to engage with virtual worlds. And as you said, Rhea, the blending of virtual and real world or analog world, whatever we're calling it, it's like those lines don't really exist so much anymore. I'd be interested to learn a little bit more about the sort of partners that you're working with at Planet Play, and specifically how you can really work with companies to embed sustainability narratives into the sort of work that you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, so I think before answering that question, there are two things we'll look at. Right? Why games, right? I think that's a question maybe also in a lot of your head, like why games is doing here. So first, I think treat games as a large, massive media. So there are over 3.4 billion people playing games, and this number is actually increasing. It's quite shocking that if in your life, any stage of your life that you haven't played games, a lot of people say, no, we've never been a gamer. But if you ask them, have you played Candy Crush? And then they say, yeah, every day, especially at the older generation. So this is a massive amount of people. And then these are normal consumers, these are citizens, and that has a massive power in that. So first, I want to emphasize that. And second is games, unlike the other media, is more active. That when you engage into the storytelling, that you're actually interacting with that storytelling. You're not only just passively receiving like film or music. So I think that is a quite different landscape. So with that note, actually, we work with quite a lot of different companies and organizations. Apart from the game industry itself, that we work with many of the game companies, for example, Xbox or Rovio. They create games that you all know, perhaps the Angry Birds and Pokemon Go, things like that. And outside of the game industry, we work a lot with, for example, NGOs like United Nations and organizations like that. We help UNDP, UNEP a lot on their sustainability messaging, as well as brands. We also, for example, worked with EV brands that want to put their cars inside of the games, and then you drive their cars and you will naturally know what this brand doing, right? So it's a very natural way.
So it's almost subliminal in the way that the messaging doesn't necessarily have to be very overt and very in your face. It's embedding it into the game in a way that feels natural.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, okay. Lucy, FUTERRA's approach has always been a very narrative-driven approach to creating impact. Can you tell us about why narratives and why storytelling has more impact, or a more, I suppose, more impactful consequences on the audience compared to maybe traditional sustainability communications?
Well, a couple of things. I might go back one step and then in terms of answering, which is often traditional marketing is actually pretty good and effective, but when it comes to sustainability marketing, often traditional marketeers kind of lose their minds and they think it's important. It's about us. It's about my kids. It's about the future. It's about the world. And forget everything they know about traditional marketing, which is you figure out what is relevant to your audience, you figure out what benefit your product or experience can bring, and you sell that to them. And instead start talking about, oh, you should, or the moral obligation, or this is good for the planet, something else other than you, which it is, but it's just that's not necessarily going to make it up to that choice architecture. So that's the first thing I'd say is that, there's still a lot to learn from traditional marketing if we don't kind of throw that out and take some shortcuts which aren't evidence-based. Secondly, this focus on narrative for building the future or rebuilding and rewiring our economies and societies to be what they need to be with, exiting out of fossil fuels and living and working in an electrified or different way. We do need better narratives and storytelling for that. We do need art. We do need gaming. We do need the actual storytelling industries rather than just the marketeers to help people see that, basically. But the piece, we ran a session on creativity at Solutions House yesterday, a FUTERRA content hub, and we had, not from gaming, but we had authors, artists, musicians, and there was an aha moment for me, which Andy and maybe Rhea as well, I think you're going to be like, yeah, which is, we often in sustainability talk about how the creative industries can kind of serve and help us tell a better story on sustainability. And that is not the creative process.
No.
Right. The creative process has its own unique thing and it'll be different for every individual or different medium. So if we really want to have sustainability, climate action, whatever your change thing is, and gaming, artistry, etc., it needs to be a little bit more of a dance. It needs to be a little bit more about what can be some inputs from this new world that we're creating that might, help the creative flow, and what might be some creative ways of describing things that the sustainability geeks haven't thought about. I mean, there's so many things to unpack here, but that was, I think I kind of knew it, but it really came home front and center for me yesterday.
Well, just to kind of bounce off
Yeah.
I mean, what I found really interesting when I arrived today, because I spent about an hour and a half wandering around, and as someone who's probably neurodiverse, it was like, wow, look at this. There's all these amazing phraseologies and words and lensing and ventile and circulose and all these kind of descriptors of these things, which are kind of like, my feeling is I'm like in a place which is full of chefs and there's all these recipes coming at me from all these different angles, and I don't really kind of know what it all means, but what I do know is that this subject about creativity, the more you try and define it, and let's face it, the philosophers, since we had education on the beaches in Greece, we try and set a scenario where we think creativity can flow, but in actual fact, the more you try and define it, it's like Schrodinger's cat. The more you try and define it, the less you can define it. But that's an amazing. Once you let that flow into you, the fact that there isn't a recipe, that's where true creativity can flow from. It's having faith.
Yeah.
It's the faith that those things can actually happen.
Yeah. And what I took from yesterday as well was how much, again, I mean, you're going to be like, what? How much work goes into the creative process, and how much thought goes into the emotions or emotional journey that you would want to take someone on in whatever artistic world that you're building. And I think we need to think. I think we need to think a bit more about that when we think about how we think about building sustainability narratives in whichever world it is we're building.
Well, we said, didn't we? We had an online chat last week, and I said that if you think of the de facto defining touch paper in the last 20 years when it comes to things to do with like climate change or ocean acidification and plastics that everyone talks about, really, Attenborough's Blue Planet shifted. Now really, you can argue whether the BBC have presented this kind of like slightly so aestheticized, but it clearly created a massive shift. So that film and that program, in a sense, kind of rephrased what scientists have been talking about for 30 years. It took one visual narrative storytelling on mainstream TV to suddenly activate a whole generation.
Yeah. On that note, Andy, a lot of your work has had themes around the natural world and really tapping into that storytelling element. When it comes to gaming and virtual worlds, where are the opportunities there that you see, that communicators, that artists, that brands, NGOs can actually find opportunities within those worlds to create sustainability narratives?
There is. If anyone wants to ask me later, I can send you a link. But there is some new evidence that, let's say, for instance, Red Dead Redemption, which is a kind of cowboy shooting up game. Now, when you're in that virtual space as a cowboy or riding a horse or whatever, it's so visceral and it's so engaging that the programmers created like wildlife and trees and rivers and it's very immersive. But what no one really knew that in actual fact there is evidence now that people are actually they're carrying out I don't know how you describe it, like the photography competitions online where people go and photograph beavers or wildebeest and it's generated this kind of interesting like animal behavior. So some people are moving from the gaming world, playing that game, and then actually getting interested in going on wildlife tours or looking into the kind of like the nature that they're experiencing in the game, which is fantastic. And it's this sort of way that virtual reality and gaming we talked about muscle memory, didn't we? And one of my anecdotes is always that one of the first games I ever played was Kelly Slater Pro Surfer about 20 years ago, and I distinctly remember the day. It was summer. I live in St Ives in Cornwall. I was playing this Kelly Slater Pro Surfer game, and I finished the game and I went for a surf in Porthmeor Beach, and I actually carried out a manoeuvre that I'd not done before, and I thought, whoa, that's amazing. Now, only later did I think, I wonder if playing that game had actually had any consequential effect. I can't prove it. I've got no evidence for it, but I'm convinced. So if we can think about those roundabout ways within the narrative storytelling, it's not planned. It's almost like you kind of like you absorb it, and then it finds its own flow into the real world.
I can actually add into that point. It's really interesting. Actually, one great example is Pokemon Go. Because when this company started building the game, they actually just had an IP, and then they were building this Google Map thing that was spun off from Google. And then when this game IP becomes so successful and they suddenly become a game company, and then they were busy making this great game. But then actually what they realized is that this game had actually enabled people to go out more. So people are going out to catch Pokemon. They naturally go out to parks and the places around their houses. So that actually encouraged people to discover areas in their neighborhood that they could have never been done before if it's without the game. So that's a great example of saying that you do something digitally, but actually impact your real life really, really meaningfully.
Yeah.
And Rhea, isn't it Pokemon that's done the litter cleanups as well, I think?
Yeah, they have done quite a lot of community events gathering together. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, which I know is a little bit by the numbers, Oh, it's sustainable, let's pick up litter. But it's, as you say, it's a community building and pride in your community thing as well.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. I'm gonna have to get Pokemon Go there now.
Yeah, download it again.
I remember being in Holland Park once and seeing lots of people. And I didn't know what was going on, and then suddenly I was like, "Oh, they're looking for Pokemons."
It's fascinating.
It's amazing to see.
Nico. It's really powerful. Rhea, on that note, I'd love to understand, from Planet Play's experience with engaging sustainability narratives into games, what sort of things work, and what sort of success stories have you seen from really embedding those narratives into specific games at the right time?
Yeah, I think through our experience, we mainly have two ways of engaging with players. So first way is engaging with players where they are, which means inside of the game. And then you want to make sure that the event and the narrative that you put in game is really something cool and fun that the players enjoy. Because if you just integrate the education message, and the players will be backlashing quite hard. This is a very vocal community.
Right.
And we have seen some kind of commercial integration not successful because of that. So what we have seen is that if you follow the narrative of the game, for example, if there's a cute animals in it, you follow saying that, okay, the habitat of these animals need to be protected in the real world, and then the gamers are really receptive for that. So we create this kind of challenges, and once players are completed, for example, a community goal, the game company will do something, for example, donate to a charity, or actually invest into green projects through our platform. So all these kind of real tangible things, players are really happy for that, because they know, okay, their effort actually translate into something that real and something concrete. So trying to avoid this kind of greenwashing thing. And the second thing that we did is a piece of work with UNDP. So we have helped the UNDP embed a clickable link into the hot titles, and this has become their largest climate survey pool among the world. And then that is actually quite fascinating, and a great example of games power is that they have run two programs, one through telephone poll, really traditional, and at the end it was like 70,000 answers throughout the year program. But through gaming, we have done over 1 million engagements and over 180,000 of completed answers just within 2 weeks, because we have embedded in Subway Surfers, Pokemon Go, Angry Bird, where the countries are really amazing. We have hit 190 countries. There's a little bit discussion, of course, with regions, discussion with UN, but that really proved that you can touch everybody anywhere through gaming and amplifying that to a message.
Yeah. I guess that comes into our next point around how you measure the impact of that messaging. I can imagine there are a lot of brands that aren't familiar to this world that would want to get involved, but want to prove the return on the investment for what they're doing. So, obviously you mentioned there, you can track survey responses and things like that, but are there other ways that are less maybe tangible that you can measure impact and actually share that the work and the investment is having real world results?
Yeah, indeed. This is actually coming to a question that most of the brand will ask, right?
Yeah.
How do you measure that? It's a quite high funnel of media, let's say. But we measure it from the basic, right? So for all the games that people play, the game company track actually a lot of data, the engagement especially. So it will be very easily to see, okay, how many people actually played and for how long that event. For example, during Earth Day, we have created a fashion event inside of a kind of a fashion metaverse game called Avakin Life, which have over 200 million downloads. And then we can track actually during that event every day there are over 200,000 people were engaging with the event, and then all of this time combined it was over years of playtime. So that is a very concrete metrics that we could share, that these are the people engaged with your storytelling. And then the other part is a real life impact. For example, how many trees we actually planted, or how much money was donated and translated into real tangible impact. That is also very meaningful for players as well when they get involved. And the third thing is actually the data that you collected directly from the survey. And then what people say, right? And then of course you can argue people doesn't necessarily do the things that what they say, but for us that we're trying to move actually the majority of the middle place where you have activists, you have people that don't care, and then you have actually majority of people,
everyone else, exactly.
in the middle. And even these people are trying to fake that they care about the environment. That actually is a good positive step to push this thing towards the good side.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that I know I said I wasn't coming on measurement, but
No, that's okay. Go for it.
I think that measuring behaviour change is so notoriously difficult. You'll spend more on measuring than you would on actually persuading people to change their behaviour in the first place. I think those measures are great.
You mentioned earlier, Lucy, at the top that you played games when you were a kid and it was as relaxing as reading for you. And I think there may be a perception sometimes that you game to switch off and you game to disconnect from the world. But I'd love to understand from your point of view, Andy and Rhea, what sort of skills or I guess qualities gamers are developing as they game, and what about that makes them really open to sustainability narratives. So many of these games that we're talking about, it's a real learning, exploration experience for a gamer. And so does that potentially open their minds and open opportunities for these narratives to become part of that as well?
Can I actually jump in?
Yeah, of course.
We are, one of our partners at FUTERRA, an agency called BE Works, did a survey on creativity, and they found that there was this correlation, very strong correlation between creativity and optimism. And generally optimism helps if you're engaging in, changing the world, saving the world, etc. Because you can test, the whole, how many uses can you think of an orange and all that stuff. There's standard kind of measures for creativity. And so they did that, and then they checked about how optimistic. And to me, that was really eye-opening. The fact that the more creative you are, the more optimistic you are. Because again, in terms of the more cynical and pessimistic you are, the less likely you are to actually get involved in climate action or nature action or whatever it is that you are. So I just thought, bring that into the gaming piece.
Well, I think just because we talked about it last week, is this I call it a swing on. Can I say it? Swing-onometer. Okay. So we have this kind of like, as a culture, we kind of swing from left. And I don't mean politically, left to right. So we'll find there's a period when we're all responding to the doom and gloom and where it's all going to end and we've got global heating and it's climate change. And then, scientists and academics and professors and various institutions will kind of push against that. And then let's swing the other direction. And we have this constant yin and yang. And we know that this kind of philosophy of yin and yang and flow back and forth is cyclical. So I don't think there's any one methodology to fix the issues that we're all discussing, we're all engaged with. And I think, time will tell. The gaming space and the virtual reality space, what's fascinating about it is this idea of a virtual safe space. So, for example, Grand Theft Auto in its previous iteration, when it was a downloadable game for PC, well, it still is, PC or the Xbox or whatever, if you're running the game on a PC, there was this way which you could mod the game. Now, I'm not a programmer. What do I know about mods? Nothing. But I know how to get a mod and how to actually apply it. And what I discovered in the game that no one was really interested in, apart from this crazy person in Cornwall playing this video game looking for plastic and waste, is I could apply a mod that removed the ocean from the game. And I thought that when the ocean vanished from the game, I just thought there'd be some blip. But clearly the programmers said, no, whales started to fall out of the sky. Dolphins were on the beach and they were flapping. So I had this scenario of like this sort of Balladian world that the oceans had disappeared.
Dystopian.
Yeah. And then the next day I found there was this other mod that I could actually do the opposite. I could actually increase the ocean level so the city was flooded and cars were floating around. And suddenly within this, again, safe space, I could imagine, not just by the visual imagery in my brain through reading a novel, but I could actually visually see this. I call it an aesthetic ecology. I could see this ecology of aesthetics playing out in front of me, and I could create all these imaginary futures, and those could be all sorts of futures. Where there's some evolutionary new creature, or you can do all these things, and that's what makes it a really fantastic sort of method to explore some of these ideas and concepts that we're all talking about.
Yeah, that's actually true. Actually, from that mod, there's a lot of games that are currently designed around the sustainability issues from the very beginning. So that's what called impact games or green game. One of the game that is a good partner of us called Imaginers. So you're on a journey that to conquer outer space, and then you're kind of the lord of a planet. But what you need to do is first, of course, you cut down the trees and develop your houses. But soon you will facing pollution issues, and you will need to balance out your economic growth versus your sustainability choice. And there's a lot of dilemma. So it's a puzzle and a strategy game that really teach people to think really on a global scale. That there's a lot of issues on your daily life. So I can also imagine, for example, I learned that here today there are so many of the material sourcing and processing of the fabrics that make them sustainable. Imagine that you put an event inside of the game and asking players to start from the beginning to do that and make sure at the end they got their certificate. That I think is a really, really powerful narrative that can leave a longer impact on people. And I believe that they will go out and tell people, do you know that? I actually know this really, really down into details.
Yeah. Can I ask as well, do you need to incentivize gamers to participate in surveys or in these challenges or different things that you're plugging into the game, or is the nature of being in the game, wanting to experience different things, wanting to learn new things, inherent and isn't necessarily something that you have to try and force on people?
That's actually very delighted at the second part, because once people open out a game and most of the time you're killing time and you're curious about the new things that the game developer putting inside of the game. So discovering is a kind of natural habit that people doing inside of game, especially when the challenges are well made and a lot of people are very delighted to participate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We talked about that noticing. I just wanted to mention this in GTA Online. I remember I thought to myself, I saw some graffiti. The game's full of graffiti. And then I was driving one of these vehicles in this virtual world, and I noticed on a beach in LA, which is the virtual LA, this thing, and there's a bit of graffiti, and I had to get really close to see it, and it said, "Climate change sucks." Now, it's quite interesting that no one probably paid much attention to what. I mean, that's an ironic. It's using irony and wit. So there are these kind of things which you can embed or hide, like little trophies or little things which you really have got to. Really, you've got to be like a ferret. You've got to kind of really search and seek. And sometimes those things, they're not incentivized. They're kind of hidden.
Well, and the incentive is the hit, like the dopamine hit, the serotonin hit.
You didn't know it was there, yeah.
Exactly. Because again, kind of going back to my piece around the dance, again, in sustainability and, thinking about the context that we're in, we classically might think, we need to incentivize people. If they bring their clothes in, we'll give them a £5 voucher or whatever it may be. And it's just too rational man. It's too ABC, because while that seems like great, I bring my clothes in, I get some voucher off. The behavioural steps you have to go through are actually pretty complex to do that. You've got to put your things aside. You've got to remember to bring them with you. You might only online shop now, so you've got to go to the shop. There's so many multiple stages. And then actually, class against that, I don't know, you're £5 off against something that you've got to buy anyway just doesn't stack up. Whereas something which is inherent to the game or the process that we're talking about, people will work. I mean, people climb Everest, for that sense of, return. So it doesn't need to be, to my mind, it doesn't need to be an economics incentive. It doesn't need to be a kind of by the book. It can be something that we get some joy from, whether it's that dopamine or serotonin hit or whatever.
Absolutely. We are going to go over to audience questions in just a minute, but I did forget to say to scan the QR code and put your questions in. So if anyone has any questions for the panel, please feel free to scan the QR code now and we'll get to them in a minute. But yeah, Lucy, I guess, a nice place to finish up might be around any advice. And I guess this is open to everybody, any advice for someone who's looking to work in this space, so whether it's a brand or whether it's a game company that wants to start thinking about sustainability narratives. You'd mentioned earlier there's been a lot of hit and miss sort of work in the sustainability comm space. people have thrown the rule book out on marketing and just tried the moral imperative side, and it hasn't necessarily worked all the time. So do you have any advice, I suppose, for people who are wanting to get into this space and wanting to connect those two worlds of the sustainability world and the gaming world together, but it might be a new experience, it might be the first time they're exploring these two things?
I think the big pitfalls that you get in, any of this is either greenwash, which Rhea mentioned earlier, or being boring and being ignored. And each of those, I shouldn't probably say this, it'll probably happen tomorrow. So we've never had a client at FUTERRA who's been accused of greenwash, but we have had a couple that have been ignored because actually we haven't managed to get that framing or that narrative, whatever it is, quite right. So a couple of things I think to think about are taking a behavioural approach, I think, is often interesting, rather than just trying to promote how brilliant you are as a brand and your sustainability message. But either flipping it around and making it about the consumer or the gamer. So what can they get out of your sustainability message, whether that's product placement that was mentioned earlier, or enabling people to change their behaviours in a way that give them benefits. Just not overstating. Oftentimes at FUTERRA, we spend our times introducing the sustainability department to the marketing department and now the gaming teams. And again, the thing I would say is I think the opportunity is huge. Like if you, again, looking at product placement, there's something like 18 billion that's spent on product placement, overall marketing. And often the growth areas of the future are the EVs or even the heat pumps, whatever it may be. So finding a way to place sustainable products, to place sustainable behaviours, and to not hubristically talk about all the fantastic things you're doing would be some tips.
Absolutely, thank you. Did anyone else want to add to that?
I think being attentive to subculture. I think music, arts, fashion. If you think about all the great discoveries or the great things that really do shift the focus, they often come from where you don't expect them to come from. They often come from somewhere else that you weren't paying attention to. So I think it's whatever area of your life is or your business, those things we talked about the other day about what people think a gamer is, it is not necessarily what they actually are. So, whether you're 20 or 50 or 60 or 80, I think you'd be surprised at actually people who do enter that space. And I think the solutions and the ideas and the new innovations sometimes will come from, rather than saying a consumer, a user. It's the user. It's the person that is like maybe in that embryonic stage. And I think sometimes people who are playing games are creating communities and they're having discussions about all sorts of subject matter that's maybe off the radar, and something will come from that.
Yeah.
That something will come from those audiences that we're not paying attention to, and that's been. Brands need to be attentive to that, not just the wider ecosphere. It's the forensic attention to that sort of area, I think, is key.
Yeah.
I think I've got an interesting question here that I wanted to get onto before we wrap up. So a lot of the fashion people in our audience will be familiar with a lot of kind of skins going on to, virtual clothes for characters, things like that in gaming. I know that that's something that fashion has been involved in the last few years when it comes to virtual worlds. But I guess there's a question here from somebody who says, have you seen any success with virtual clothing on as NFTs on gaming platforms, or are players investing in virtual clothing that can be worn across platforms? So kind of bringing that sort of real fashion element in, and maybe whether there's any sort of sustainability opportunities within that as well.
Yeah, definitely. There you can see actually, I think Balenciaga did one with Fortnite, and there's a lot of luxury brands coming into the platforms. But even you look at like normal mobile games, nearly every game has custom skins, items. You have UGC items, meaning that user can create their own piece of fashion. Those are hugely popular, and then these are actually majority of the money that where players are invested, because they spend so much time in it. They want their avatar to look sexy and cute. It's very much much correlated with the trend that's happening in the real world. What we have seen is, and as actually one piece of advice is the brand could be really open-minded about this, right? Because the audience are very creative. And if you can create something cool and resonating the audience, that will be the best. And sustainability angle is definitely on the cool side because this actually is in a lot of heart of the Gen Z community. But if you're seeking actually virtual fashion as a way to generating revenue, then that is what we have seen not so successful because the players can actually smell that kind of commercial sense immediately, and then
it's too cynical.
yeah, exactly. So what we see is that if you have a great brand story and then could make it cool, open-minded, that would be a great media for you to amplify in that messaging. Yeah.
Interesting. I have a very interesting question here saying, radical imagination shapes our future. Is it more powerful to focus on the harm we risk and to educate from that point of view, or the good we could create by co-visualizing utopia? Which I think is a really interesting question. Thank you to whoever shared that one.
I mean, I
Lizzie?
could jump in.
Yeah, absolutely.
To say that, again, in my community, the sustainability community, there's been a lot of vision setting
We're
in
good
the
at that.
past 20 years. And oftentimes, the problem with them is they're too clean. They're too, again, by the numbers. There's a reason in the creative process or the creative worlds, there's so many dystopias that they're kind of fun, right? Or the thing you were talking about
So
earlier.
many
with the
zombie
boat.
movies.
Zombie movies,
Yeah.
the Blade Runners, and you can play exactly as you were describing. You can turn the rules upside down. You can shake things around. So I absolutely think using different medium to create new futures that we can have a little play around with is part of the process that we need. But we need to find ways of making the utopias sexy or gritty or real or about drama and passion and all these things rather than just all a bit squeaky clean.
Yes, yeah.
Coexist. Both things coexist.
Well, you mentioned earlier about taking away the ocean and then flooding the city, and how you can experience both of those.
Well, the thing is, as an artist, I love juxtaposition. I mean, let's think decollage or collage. We're fascinated by those things. So you walk into a city street, and there's a poster falling off on the wall. There's something about, I think it's called scafolia or something. There's this kind of like idea that you want to unpick. So there's those two things. They're unhappy bedfellows in a sense, aren't they? The dystopian, kind of the road, and then some kind of utopia, Disney. The thing is, they're not. They coexist, and I absolutely adore juxtaposing video clips that I find online from the Library of Congress from 1936 with a piece of video footage that I just shot yesterday. It's those things, it's bringing those things together that creates the new meaning, and that's what we need to sort of focus on, I think.
Yeah, I think also that positive loop actually encourage people to do more. This is a bit that we find actually working very well inside of the game. Maybe that kind of dopamine dropping loop is how it was designed in the first place in games. If you can showcase that this is a bit that you have so easily done and then create a real world impact, and then the players are more leaning into do it a second time. And we have actually collected data through our survey. 72% of the players said that they have at least changed one living habit to be more sustainable after playing this green content. So I think that definitely is something that proved that positive messaging actually works quite well.
And even if they didn't, or even if they did it for a bit and then kind of fell off, the positive intent is really crucial at the moment, where we have a lot of brands falling out of this because of green claims code and ESG attack. So to this. And we miss them because we need the general conversation to be around, moving things forward for sustainability and climate action. So yeah, again, even if folks don't actually take the action, even if they feel just generally positive about it, that is a really good thing.
Yeah, 100%.
I think that's a really nice place to finish up on. I'd like to thank my panelists, Lucy, Andy, and Rhea. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope this has been interesting and some new insights for everybody. Yeah, thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.